Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this webinar on investing intentionally at the systems level. My name is Nicole Harmon. I'm a program associate with the Intentional Endowments Network, and I'm very pleased to have with me two great panelists to share their experience and expertise on this subject today. Next slide, please. We'll be hearing from Bill Burckart, President and COO of the Investment Integration Project, also known as TIIP, and Jessica Ziegler, Associate Director of Research at TIIP. They will discuss the systems level context of institutional investors' investment decisions, review a new report from TIIP titled Effective Investing for the Long Term, Intentionality at Systems Levels, and explore TIIP's research portal and database of investor profiles. After our panelist presentations, we'll spend the remainder of the hour in dialogue responding to your questions. So please enter your questions throughout the presentation in the chat function of the control panel at any time, and we'll try to get to as many of them as possible. This webinar is being recorded. It will be distributed to all registrants by email and will also be available on our website shortly after it's completed, so you can refer back to this conversation and share it with others. And we will also make the slides available upon request. Next slide, please. So just briefly before we dive in, for those of you that aren't familiar with the Intentional Endowments Network, we are a nonprofit collaborative peer learning network with the goal of supporting endowments in enhancing performance by aligning investments with institutional mission, values, and sustainability goals. We do this in a variety of ways, including hosting in-person forums and events, facilitating peer networking, curating useful resources on sustainable investing opportunities, and providing educational venues such as webinars like this one. So we encourage you to stay engaged in these conversations after today's webinar. More information is available on our website. You can see a link on this slide, and you are welcome to reach out to us at any time. So with that, we can go to our next slide, and I'll turn it over to Bill.
Thanks, Nicole, and thanks to the Intentional Endowments Network for hosting this webinar and for all the attendees for joining us. So to kind of start off with a basic level set, what is TIIP? So TIIP is a research services organization that helps institutional investors understand the implications of their investment practices and decisions on the environmental, societal, and financial systems within which they operate, and the impact of these systems on their portfolios. We do this through a research portal and database of investor profiles, market analysis, and practical guidance that provide a better way to match investors to like-minded peers, benchmark strategies, and optimize the development of investment activities and other initiatives that address pressing systems-level issues. We view these strategies as adding to one, risk control and alpha generation at the holdings portfolio level, and two, strengthening the underlying systems on which all our investments are made, and therefore beta generation for portfolios as a whole, i.e. creating a rising tide of economic prosperity we and others will benefit from. So as Nicole mentioned, Jess and I are going to cover a number of details over the next 30 minutes or so, including the changing nature of investment, systems level investment generally, what it is and why investors, including foundations and endowments, should care, TIIP's recent research and insights on systems level investment, our subscription-based research portal and database, and the next steps for our work. So to start, over the last couple of decades, many investors have recognized that the world's most pressing global and environmental challenges cannot be tackled without harnessing the capital markets and engaging business. In response, the financial community have evolved a variety of approaches that recognize the importance of considerations that transcend the traditional daily challenges of portfolio management. In this slide, you can see these are just a few of the headlines from the past few years that signal the broader shift afoot. Major investment research and management firms like Morningstar are now providing company-level environmental social governance scores that reflect how well a firm is addressing ESG issues based on a series of indicators measuring preparedness, disclosure, and performance. Providers of equity, fixed income, hedge fund, stock market indices, and equity portfolio analysis tools like MSCI are providing in-depth research, ratings, and analysis of the ESG-related business practices of thousands of companies worldwide. Big asset owners like the California Public Employees Retirement System are increasingly requiring managers to identify and articulate ESG in their investment processes. CalPERS in particular is factoring into its decisions about hiring and monitoring external investment managers the degree to which these managers assess ESG factors and integrate them into their processes. Even the vaunted CFA Institute, the Global Association of Investment Professionals that offers the Chartered Financial Analyst designation, now advises investors that considering ESG issues will likely lead to more complete investment analyses and better informed investment decisions. But TIIP's research shows that investors, like many of the pension funds, insurance companies, endowments, diversified financial institutions, and responsible investment management firms that are included here, are going beyond the integration of conventional investment activities with portfolio level environmental, social, and governance factors to actually harness reliable investment techniques towards two mutually reinforcing ends. One focused on global systems and the other on portfolio management. As our research also shows, in taking this next evolutionary step, asset owners and managers have begun to establish a parallel set of policies and practices alongside their traditional approach to investing at a portfolio level. Examples abound, such as central banks like the Bank of England, which under the leadership of Mark Carney has determined that climate change is a risk factor similar to others affecting the financial or economic system and has assessed its potential impact on the United Kingdom's insurance industry. It has also identified and embarked on defining the issue of stranded carbon assets. There are asset owners like the Jesse Smith Noyce Foundation, which under the leadership of Steve Godeke, used the occasion of a fall 2016 open call for a new investment advisor to challenge bidding firms to connect how the foundation's portfolio could drive the change of systemic impact in the areas of social justice, equality, human rights, health, and diversity. Even asset managers such as Cornerstone Capital Group under the leadership of Erica Karp has taken intentional steps to advance transparency in the financial industry and to increase the resources for stakeholders that want to better understand the materiality of environmental, social, and governance considerations on their investments. But this shift in perspective is not just the territory of a few bespoke investors. Key catalysts behind the changing investment culture include industry-led initiatives like the UN-backed Principles for Responsible Investment, a network of more than 1,500 investors working to create a sustainable financial system. It is increasingly contending with issues related to the operation of the financial system as a whole, including its purpose, its design, its effectiveness, and its resilience to risks and sustainability challenges. The Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, which aims for companies to voluntarily produce climate-related financial risk disclosure for the investment community, is another force of change. According to Michael Bloomberg, the chair of the TCFD, the work of the task force will help to accelerate global investments in technological innovation and clean energy by increasing transparency, which will in turn enable a vision to make markets more efficient and economies more stable and resilient. Also in 2016, the Global Impact Investing Network launched its campaign urging investors around the world to channel their capital to impact investing by aligning their investments with UN's Sustainable Development Goals. So let's stay on the SDGs for a second. So the SDGs provide a really great jumping off point for our discussion generally about systems level investing. The SDGs are at its heart a universal call to action to end poverty, protect the planet, and ensure that all people enjoy peace and prosperity. Although presented as goals, the SDGs have the characteristics of what we at TIIP refer to as systems level issues. By systems, we mean this vast set of what are essentially common pooled environmental and societal resources upon which civilizations have depended for thousands of years and upon which investors have been so reliant in creating long-term wealth. For institutional investors concerned about the ongoing health of these systems, which TIIP categorizes as environmental, societal, and financial, and or are motivated by the SDGs, a major question raised by the increasing emphasis on them and other systems level issues is how an investor actually implements them. The SDGs are, after all, were developed by government for government. They were not developed by investors for investors. So while a number of investors are managing to achieve often vague alignment with the SDGs, far fewer can actually connect their investment activities with them, let alone measure and report on their unique contribution to achieving them. So before we can even begin to explain how TIIP can help investors, which is what this graphic attempts to demonstrate, we need to first better understand what exactly systems level investing is and why investors should care about it. For this, I now turn the floor over to Jessica.
Great, thank you, Bill. So Bill just described how institutional investment is changing and discussed how both asset owners and managers are increasingly caring about and are integrating environmental, social, and financial system considerations into their practices. He noted that they're not just doing so to enhance the risk-return profiles of their portfolios, but they're also increasingly considering their impacts at broader, quote, systems levels. This is thanks in part to initiatives like the UN Sustainable Development Goals, but also because of an evolving and maturing sense that the health and stability of systems affect their bottom lines. I thought it'd be worthwhile to spend the next few minutes answering some basic questions that might be crossing your minds right now. Namely, what do we mean when we say systems? What are we referring to when we talk about systems level investing? And really, most importantly, why should any of you care? Why should any investors care about any of this? So just to reiterate something Bill just said, at TIIP, when we talk about systems, we're referring to the vast set of what are essentially common pooled resources upon which civilizations have developed or depended, for thousands of years, and upon which investors rely to create long-term wealth. We think about systems, or these commonly pooled resources, as fitting into three categories: environmental, societal, and financial. So when we talk about the environmental system, we're talking about the ecosystems that make up the natural world and upon which we all depend to meet our basic survival needs. Most commonly, for example, when discussing the environmental system, TIIP and investors alike emphasize the impact that investors might have on climate change, and in turn, the impact that climate change has on these ecosystems. When we talk about the societal system, we're talking about the various social constructs that provide the foundation for society. So we're talking about things like equality, well-being, and education, et cetera, or things that help to keep societies functioning in a stable way for all of their participants. And finally, when we say financial system, we're talking about the various laws, regulations, institutions, and norms that enable the smooth functioning of markets. So why should investors care about these systems? Or put another way, why should they think about the big picture context of their investments? The main reason we think is that finance and investment are built on the predictability and reliability of these systems. Stable systems promote healthy market returns just as surely as unstable ones can lead to reduced or negative market returns. Investors should also care about systems because we're living in a world that is vastly different than it was even 10 or 20 years ago, never mind 100 years ago. We are in the midst of the digital era where information zips from one side of the earth to the other almost instantly. Seemingly local issues can now rise to the global level and impact markets very quickly. Put simply, the world is more connected than ever before. So for example, let's revisit a few of the lowlights from the 2008 financial crisis. Lehman Brothers went out of business. 6 million people lost their jobs. The Dow plunged 5,000 points and cash-strapped banks needed government bailouts. General Motors and Chrysler declared bankruptcy, and the U.S. unemployment rate skyrocketed to almost 10%. That is all to say nothing of the worldwide downturn. All of this pain was felt because a few smart people made decisions to boost portfolio returns while turning a blind eye to the systemic risks they were creating. So the financial crisis is an easy target or convenient example for what happens when the financial system becomes unstable. But how will other systems level issues like climate change, mass migrations, and a continued lack of transparency in the financial markets play out? Are our global systems resilient enough to withstand shocks created when any one of these issues reaches a tipping point? So these are the sorts of questions that we're grappling with at TIIP. And our overarching contention is that in a world that's growing ever more connected, long-term investors will increasingly have to face these types of issues. So that was the bad news. The good news is we believe that investors are not powerless when it comes to maintaining the health and stability of global systems. And in fact, we think they can be quite powerful. We're increasingly finding evidence that investors are not only acknowledging that these systems influence them, but they are also taking steps to help fortify these systems and enhance their wealth creating potential. So these investors are engaged in what we call systems level investing. So they're managing to two goals simultaneously. They're striving for positive portfolio returns, but also for positive social impact. So on the one hand, they're buying and selling in the marketplace and managing their portfolios on the basis of price, seeking to maximize their returns while minimizing their risks. But at the same time, they have an eye toward the long-term preservation of the environment, society, and financial system, and are seeking to manage their impacts on those systems. By integrating both goals, they work to achieve balance between doing good and making profits, between values and price. So put simply, systems-level investing is the intentional and proactive consideration by investors of overarching systems in their traditional portfolio management. So over the past 2+ years, TIIP has been engaged in a series of research projects to help expand the investment community's understanding of environmental, societal, and financial systems, and to help inform the development of practical guidance on adopting systems-level investment strategies. Among these research projects, which I'll talk about now, are TIIP State of the Industry analyses. So last year, we at TIIP released the first of what we hope will be an annual State of the Industry analysis report. It analyzed information on the systems level and related investment approaches utilized by a mix of 50 asset owners and managers that have a total of about more than $17 trillion in assets under management. Soon after that report, we released a follow-up which provides a parallel analysis focused exclusively on how 14 central banks and development finance institutions are similarly incorporating these approaches into their work. Key findings from these two reports included: one, that investors are increasingly worried about short-termism and are wishing to see longer-term practices predominate; and two, that they understand that they depend on and in turn impact the systems that underlie their investment practices. These analyses also found that many investors are expressing their current concern for systems-level issues through what we call on-ramps to systems-level investing. So these are probably familiar to you and include approaches listed here on the slide, such as ESG integration, impact investing, and negative exclusionary screening. These investors are also incorporating systems-level considerations into numerous of their key investment activities. In other words, we found evidence that investors are reflecting their commitment to systems-level investing through their investment belief statements, through their security selection and portfolio construction, and then their development of special targeted investment programs, among other activities. Most notably, these analyses led us to establish what we call our 10 Tools of Intentionality framework. So like I just said, our State of the Industry found that investors are convinced that the environmental, societal, and financial systems that they operate within affect them, and that they, in turn, affect these systems. The analysis also found that investors are taking action to preserve and enhance the health and stability of systems, and are doing so through one or more of 10 different approaches. And we've called these approaches, or we've summarized these approaches into our 10 Tools of Intentionality. These tools listed in the figure represent specific pathways through which investors bridge the gap between daily portfolio management and the integration of systems-level considerations into investment strategies. That is, they are 10 different ways in which institutional investors with long-term investment horizons try to manage systemic risks and rewards. We found that the investors that use the tools do so with intentionality. So in other words, their focus on the efficient allocation of assets as part of daily portfolio management doesn't necessarily lead them to utilize any of the tools. Rather, they have to very intentionally act to do so. So Apologies for the small font in the figure on this slide. Larger versions of it are available on our website in the reports that I mentioned. And also I'm gonna talk about a few specific of the 10 tools on the following slides when I discuss our Accelerating Intentionality Management project. So the state of the industry analyses confirm that many investors care about systems, and that many are also integrating strategies into their investment approaches to manage risk and rewards at systems levels, and that each of the identified strategies aligns with what we call our 10 tools of intentionality. So our subsequent Accelerating Intentionality Management project set out to better define these 10 tools of intentionality for investors, and really to provide investors seeking to integrate systems level investing into their overall investment strategies with practical guidance on how to identify and use each of the tools. So through the Accelerating Intentionality Management project, we developed a report that contains an approximately one-page write-up of each tool that answers the fundamental questions posted here on this slide. So what is the tool, which we provide a basic definition of the tool. How is the tool implemented, or what are the typical characteristics of the investors who use the tool? What are some examples of investors that use the tool in some notable way? How can the tool be used together with other tools to achieve maximum systems level influence? And why do investors use the tool? So what is it about the tool that can help investors achieve, or what can investors achieve using the tool that they can't achieve through their conventional portfolio management practices? So obviously we don't have time to discuss all 10 of the tools, so I'll just spend a few minutes on 2 that investors we've worked with have shown a particular interest in for one reason or another, and those are the tools of additionality and solutions. Investors that are using the tool of additionality to affect systems level change are those that are pursuing investments that provide access to finance to the underserved and that address unmet environmental or social needs. Investors that we identified as using the additionality tool shared the 3 features listed here on this slide, including that they are particularly adept at 1, recognizing the market potential of underserved regions and segments of the population; 2, at promoting healthy growth by identifying unrecognized and underfunded challenges that fill gaps in the marketplace, fill capital gaps in the marketplace; and 3, at understanding how these markets and opportunities have the potential to produce competitive returns. Bridges Fund Management was among the investors highlighted by TIIP for its notable use of the additionality tool. Bridges intentionally targets opportunities that create jobs, improve skills, and promote healthcare in historically underserved communities, while also emphasizing sustainable living. It has invested in companies that provide skills training for disadvantaged youth, energy services for low and moderate income communities, and programs that promote healthy lifestyles and obesity reduction. So why do investors like Bridges use additionality to affect systems change? In short, conventional portfolio management practices can lead investors to overinvest in parts of the economy already well served through considerations of short-term profit generation, and as such contribute to boom and bust cycles. By intentionally addressing social and environmental capital needs that might otherwise go unfulfilled, additionality investors can reduce economic instabilities and promote, quote, healthy growth. The other tool that I'll discuss briefly is the solutions tool. Investors that are using this tool are those that are pursuing investments that can solve societal and environmental challenges in ways that support the stability and enhancement of systems. One of the 6 core investment approaches of the large Dutch pension fund manager PGGM is investing in solutions for sustainable investment in 4 target areas: climate change, water scarcity, healthcare, and food security, through what it calls its investing in solutions portfolio. So these solutions investments that PGGM engages in, they share 3 features. They, 1, contribute to financial ambition with regular risk and return expectations. 2, are intended to support positive impact on at least one of the target areas that I just mentioned. And 3, aim to create impact substantial relative to a baseline or relevant benchmark. So why do investors like PGGM use the solutions tool? Conventional portfolio management can lead investors to exacerbate systems level challenges. So an environmentally themed water fund, for example, might focus on privatization of water supplies in a world of water scarcity without actually seeking to address the problem of access to water for the economically disadvantaged. By seeking to resolve rather than profit from crucial systems level challenges, investors can help to build a solid foundation of sustainable systems that will provide a long-term source of future investment opportunities. Before I turn the presentation back over to Bill, I wanted to also mention that in addition to information on the what, how, and why of each of the tools of intentionality, the Accelerating Intentionality Management Project report also provides readers with lists of all of the investors that we've thus far identified as using each tool. Feedback that we received from investors indicated that it's useful for them to be able to identify who they consider to be their peers and to read about what they're doing in order to help them better understand systems level investing and how to use the 10 tools. I'll now turn things back over to Bill, who will show you how you can access the various research that I just reviewed and to tell you about what TIIP is currently working on.
Great, thanks, Jessica. So now that we've covered the changing nature of investment and the basics on systems level investment, we're going to turn our attention to demoing TIIP's research portal and database, which is meant to serve as a kind of gateway into the world of systems level investing for asset owners and managers. Put another way, the database offers a roadmap to systems and themes-based investing that any good governance board or strong fiduciary should understand in the kind of evolving world that Jessica described. It's not a static portal though, it's a living, breathing piece of technology offering daily, weekly, and monthly deliverables. We believe, as far as we can tell, it is the most comprehensive portal and database focused on systems level investment approaches. And our data has been tailored to address the needs of thousands of asset owners and managers and comprises decades of experience and research. We are confident there's no other offering serving investors in this way at this time. So with all of that build up, let me go ahead and show you guys what we have here. So I guess as a baseline, let's start with articulating who uses the database resources and why. For asset management firms, you often need to see the quickest ways to build new relationships or build upon current ones to win mandates with asset owners. Well, the TIIP database is a place where you can see the competition, see the interest, and know who to connect with. For asset owners, the leading benefits of TIIP's portal is that it provides the newest proprietary research on systems level investing and offers a way to quickly benchmark strategies and compare and contrast asset managers along a whole host of select criteria. So this is the homepage of what we're calling the resources portal. Here we have a wealth of information and resources about systems level investing, which you can see along the left navigational pane over here. From updates on new profiles, so this is a feature that subscribers see where you can see right now for the month of August, we're adding these profiles to the database. To other features like our latest research, the projects that we're engaging in, events that we have coming up, and guidance around the integration of various intentionality strategies or integration of systems level considerations in key investment activities. But all of this really, what's covered here, is really meant to help investors understand and optimize their usage of the database. And this is where we'll spend the bulk of the next couple of minutes. So TIIP has structured the database and the navigational bar you see here on the left with you and your peers in mind, and we hope that it shows. So this database provides thorough data sets that are derived from our proprietary research, helping to move past a lot of the kind of generic adaptions of press release type information that you might find elsewhere, and that lacks the level of detail you see here. So maybe it's helpful as a kind of grounding exercise to start with an individual profile and explain what is covered. So let's go ahead and just pull up the FB Heron Foundation. So this is what the basic profile for one of the investors covered in our database. Each profile really helps to understand the investor in question, their systems level approaches, and identify models for systems level investment. Each profile, as you can see here, contains organizational characteristics, dimensions of systems and systems-related approaches, practical applications of approaches undertaken, and approaches, successes, and challenges. So here's where we include our tipping point, which is where we describe and characterize what we see as their key intentionality strategies. We then go into these basic organizational characteristics and some of the kind of founding principles for why an investor is moving in these directions. We go through each investment activity. So Heron happens to be extremely mature in this department and is one of the more comprehensive investment belief statements that captures how the kind of systems level influence they seek to have. We also go in to look at how these kinds of issues, systems or systems related dimensions are manifesting within other key investment activities, and then get into how they might approach impact monitoring and reporting, and then cite everything accordingly. So this is just to give you a sense of what's covered in an individual portfolio or investor. But let's get to where the real power of the database comes in. So for example, it can serve as a kind of matching tool to help asset owners find asset managers and vice versa. So let's say I'm an asset owner like an endowment and I'm searching for asset managers that specialize in public equity. I can go over here, I can click on asset managers. I can then define the asset class that I'm particularly interested in, i.e. public equities. And now with 2 clicks, my original list of 74 investors has been usefully narrowed down to 20. Now, if for some reason I was looking for asset managers focused on climate change, which I could do here, I can then get that results down to a narrower set of 12. So now I want to look at them a little bit more and I want to actually compare and contrast along select criteria. So here's where I can look at, say, the tools of intentionality that they're actually focused on, other systems and themes. Perhaps I want to look a little bit more at how we actually characterize the systems level strategy that they're engaging in. I might also be curious about their security selection and portfolio construction processes, and maybe how they do impact monitoring and reporting. I then am able to generate a report, such as what you see here, which lays out the investors that I ended up searching along, the dimensions that I searched along, and then the actual results as corresponding to the various criteria. And so this is where you can start to see very discrete variables, but then you can get more further elaborations as we get into things like characterization of their tipping points, as well as their various processes like impact monitoring and reporting, so on and so forth. Now this time, we'll go back and do another search. Let's say I'm an asset manager and I want to better understand asset owners focus on, say, income inequality. So in this particular case, I'm going to look at endowments and pensions in particular, given the audience that we have here today. And I'm going to go down here and I'm going to look at income inequality. Once I can get this thing pulled up. There we are. So income inequality. Now, with a few clicks, we've managed to get a database of 74 down to 4. So now I'm going to go ahead and compare across various select criteria that I know is going to be of particular interest to me as an asset manager, trying to better understand what these asset owners want to achieve and how I can most competitively position myself to help them fulfill those goals. So in this case, I'm going to once again look at what are the tools of intentionality they're focused on, what are the systems, the characterization of those systems level activities. In this case, because I'm an asset manager and I'm really trying to understand how to best match with what they're looking for, I'm going to look at their investment belief statements. I'm also going to look at what their manager selection criteria might be and how they monitor managers. And I'm going to look at their impact in monitoring and reporting processes. So once again, I have my subset of asset owners that I'm looking at, the criteria that I decided to search along, and then I get the breakdown and along discrete variables as well as further elaborations as you go. And in particular, you look at things like impact monitoring and reporting, investment belief statements, things that are going to help me better understand the type of change, whether impact or influence the asset owner is attempting to achieve. So to come back up here, that was a quick demo. Anyone that wants a further demo, we do that one-on-one, so just let us know. But to basically recap, whether you're an asset owner, a manager, or investment advisor, the database provides you with a number of things. It provides you a way to reduce search costs. As you saw, with just a few clicks, you can search for and explore investors that have adopted systems-level approaches. You can create or refine strategies to win business, increase competitiveness, and preserve long-term returns, learning from the work of your peers by reading these different summaries of investment approaches. You can identify market opportunities, compare and contrast investors across a variety of criteria, and use tips, tools, frameworks, and guidance and market analysis to better enhance the systems-oriented strategies that you might be engaging in. And fundamentally, you can stay informed. This is, once again, a living and breathing database. We keep it updated on a day-to-day basis. And our market intelligence does cover the latest trends in systems-level investing. And our events and ongoing research give investors an opportunity to help inform the work that we're doing. Case in point, the effective investing for the long-term intentional systems levels that Jess made reference to, this is currently undergoing a kind of exposure draft listening tour, in the sense that we want feedback from investors to the ideas that we've captured here, and so are looking for different industry groups to help inform this. Part of the reason our interest in doing this webinar was so that we could hopefully engage members of the Intentional Endowments Network on this body of work, so that ultimately what we produce is as useful and insightful as possible. So to bring this over the finish line, I will now come out of this and take us back to the PowerPoint. I'll now do a quick snapshot of what TIIP is focused on going forward. And so this is kind of captured in a couple of different ways, as you see laid out here. We're going to complete additional investor profiles. So as you saw, we're at 74 now. We'll be at a full 100 by the end of the year. That includes both new profiles as well as updates, which we're doing to existing profiles on an annual basis. So everything should be current and at 100 by the end of the year. We are going to continue to refine our tools framework. Part of this effective investing report is a manifestation of that, where we have codified more lessons, we have refined and created more nuance in terms of how investors begin to consider and implement the different tools of intentionality. We're also developing toolkits, both as they relate to key investment activities like the development of investment belief statements or security selection and portfolio construction techniques, to help guide investors as they begin to integrate systems level considerations in their core investment activities. We're also developing issue-focused toolkits focused on particular systems level issues like circular economy or income inequality that help really frame these issues in the context of not just holdings related activities, but non-holdings related intentionality type strategies. We continue to expand the TIIP subscriber portal and database, both growing the investor community and growing the shelf of market analysis and practical guidance. And we are specifically going very deep on addressing the issues of systems level impact measurement and reporting. We'll have an initial report to release by the end of the year focused on answering the question of how investors can begin to measure the systems level impact and influence of their investment activities. That will be followed by a related convening in Chicago in January. And we will be following all of that up with the release of the first ever systems level impact report that we have been developing in tangent with a leading asset manager, which is anticipated for March of 2018. So to sum up, TIIP's tools are designed to be to make frameworks like the UN's SDGs as well as others to help institutional investors begin to do things like conduct systems level audits on their investment strategies and activities, take deeper dives to better understand and replicate systems level strategies in particular issues, design targeted investment programs, develop investment belief statements, enhance manager selection processes, as well as other key investment activities. So I will pause or wrap up there and turn it back over to Nicole for the balance of the session.
Great. Thank you so much, Bill and Jessica, for those wonderful presentations. We can Oh, already at the Q&A slide. Perfect. And for our panelists, if we can stay off mute, we'll jump into our questions here. And for the audience, please do continue to type your questions into the chat box in the control panel, and we will get to as many of those questions as we can. So to start off with a general question, based on this research and the profiles in the database that you've collected so far, how common would you say that systems level investing is in the space at this time? And could you describe in a little bit more detail the relationship between systems level investing and other SRI strategies, including ESG integration and shareholder engagement and impact investing?
Absolutely, it's a very good question. So to comment first on what we see as the kind of proliferation of systems level investing, if you had asked us that question when Steve and I initially launched TIIP, which would have been in the spring of 2015, the world was extremely narrow in terms of activity. But just in the past 2 years, where you see things like the Task Force on Climate-Related Disclosure, you see efforts by SASB to start looking at the macro level implications of its various industry-specific indicators, or the PRI launching a sustainable financial system program, which is they look at one particular system, which is the financial system, but essentially looking at many of the same things as us. And then the explosion of the SDGs, it's amazing how those 17 very colorful boxes has kind of gripped the imagination of investors everywhere. So when we think about kind of the progression of the kind of uptick of systems level thinking amongst investors, we're definitely seeing it accelerate. So if we would have seen that there was this kind of narrow world of activity maybe just 2 years ago, now we see it as something that is reflected across a whole host of investors. And the real question right now is, what is the depth and rigor of those activities? And that's the kind of open question. One of the comments I made was, there's a lot of investors that are now trying to draw alignment with the SDGs. And just to kind of continue to hamper on that, that particular point, that they're achieving alignment in some vague way, but they're not necessarily able to demonstrate progress in a very transparent or credible way. And so I think that's the big open question for us, is seeing what is the depth of these strategies, because we are increasingly seeing the kind of breadth of it. And it's not just isolated to big institutional investors like pension funds or sovereign wealth funds. We are seeing activity, and this was part of the tipping point reports that Jess made reference to. Part of the effort behind those reports has been to really capture the spectrum of activity. So it's insurance companies, it's endowments, it's diversified financial firms, it's self-described impact and responsible investment firms. So we're definitely seeing an acceleration of awareness and the beginning stages of activity. Where we're still kind of, we're seeing a little bit slower is the depth of that activity. And investors of all shapes and sizes are still struggling with that. One of our big hopes with the measurement and reporting work that we're doing is that seems to be it's the holy grail, right? It's this measurement question of, if we can crack that and we can really demonstrate comprehensive frameworks for how an investor begins to measure the impact of their holdings related activities and the kind of influence of their non-holdings related activities, we think that that will help not just address the general awareness and activity question, but also the depth and rigor of these strategies. How that relates to a lot of these, what we refer to as on-ramps to systems thinking, so where we see things like responsible investment, ESG integration, impact investment, universal ownership, long-term value creation, we see these as very much living in a similar world as systems level investment. But more often than not, these strategies, the reason they don't get to a systems level is that they very much they stop at the portfolio level. They're very interested in the impact or understanding activity, specifically how it relates to the portfolio. they're not necessarily trying to understand the broader impact or influence of those investments beyond the portfolio. And that's where we see the distinction between systems level investment and what we refer to as these on-ramps to systems thinking. I want to pause there. I don't know if Jessica might characterize that a little bit differently or more thoroughly.
No, but I think that's all on point. The only thing I would add is with regard to these investors that we've identified as participating in these on-ramps and systems level investing, so ESG integration, impact investing, and so forth, I'd say probably all of the investors in our database right now provide examples of doing these things. Some of them then progressing on to do work at the systems level. But I think what we're seeing with this group of investors that's focused on these on-ramp activities is that a lot of them have the interest and infrastructure and general know-how in place to progress to the systems level, but just need sort of some additional guidance on how to wrap their head around systems level investment concepts, how to take things to what we at TIIP consider to be the next step. So they're not too far afield from systems level investing, and they have a lot of the puzzle pieces in place to get there. They're just sort of inching their way there. And alignment with the SDGs, like Bill mentioned, is one of the initial ways that we're seeing progress made.
Great, that's very helpful, thank you. And a few questions about the database overall. Could you talk about how the information in the profiles is gathered and how comprehensive that is? We've had a few questions about how different asset managers or owners can get listed on the platform, and also if you address investment performance in that database as well.
Yeah, all good questions. So a point about how information is gathered. So the kind of primary differentiation from what TIIP does versus some other databases. All of our insights come from really deep interviews and research that is proprietary. We rely on public information only as a supplement that is added for additional data points and references. One of the limitations that we saw with some of the other databases out there was that they almost kind of read as glorified press releases, where for us it was really, because we are attempting to introduce or help to foster a discussion and awareness around a very complicated topic, there's not a lot of just stuff sitting on the shelf where people have used systems language or really understand their activities in that way. So a lot of this has been us providing our own lens and relying on interviews and relying on all these other kind of proprietary methods like surveys and such to generate the kind of insights we need to really populate these profiles. And I think that, you know, part of the power of the profiles too is that we really do focus in on how these activities and strategies ultimately relate to key investment activities, so holdings related activities, and then these kind of other non-holdings related activities that we see as particularly critical to the achievement of a lot of these systems level strategies. So that was the first question. I'm now blanking on what the second question. Jess, maybe you heard it? Or Nicole, if you could just
it was the second and third questions, Bill, were how can an investor get added to the database, and does the database include any information on investment performance?
Right. All good. Yes. Okay. So in terms of the question about how to get added, so it is a subscriber-based database and portal. It's not a pay-to-play model though, and so for any investor that wants to get featured in the database, the clearest, most direct message is begin to experiment with systems level considerations in your investment activities. We have a pretty thorough process for how we identify and ultimately focus in on investors to profile within the database. We have both a informal network of key advisors that we cull from the worlds of pension funds and sovereign wealth funds, and really being able to speak to all the different segments of investors that we look at to help us surface promising investors or interesting strategies that might not otherwise ping the radar. we also call from our own just industry knowledge and experience. So something like our founder, Steve Lydenberg, is he's a known entity in the space. He's sat on various selection and awarding committees focused on excellence and best practices and responsible investment. And so we look at a number of different inputs to who we ultimately select, and then even from that perspective, we do our surveying mechanism to help try to generate increased insight into who might be doing interesting things, to be able to then call that down to figure out who exactly we should be focusing on. And fundamentally, I mean, the biggest message is make sure that you start to move in this direction. And the more that an investor moves in this direction, the more likely they are to surface through one of our many ways of engaging the field. And that is ultimately what dictates when an investor is ultimately profiled in our database. And the question of performance, so we look at it in a couple ways. These are fundamentally manager level profiles. They're not portfolio level profiles. And that distinction is pretty important to us. So where we will see certain things, maybe in corporate engagement or portfolio construction or targeted investment programs, where some of that performance will be relayed, we very much are focused at understanding and contextualizing the systems related activities of the investor and featuring how they demonstrate performance at a systems level, which can be related to actual financial returns performance, but it can also be reflected in other ways. But fundamentally, these are manager level profiles, and that's what's featured in it. So we touch on performance in certain ways, but very much are focused on how the investor really identifies systems level performance, which takes the shape beyond just actual financial return. I'll pause there. Jessica, anything you'd like to add there?
No, I think you covered it all.
Great.
Great, thank you. So we have time for a few more questions. For those that do want to move in this direction, what initial steps do you think endowments can take to start integrating these system level considerations into their investment decisions?
It's a great question, and I think that this is the thing that for folks to get conceptually around, it can be for sure a challenge. So things like doing a systems level audit, really looking at the activities that the investor has been engaging in up until this point, to really understand historically what are the different strategies that either fall within the buckets of these on-ramp activities like responsible or ESG integration, long-term value creation, understanding what the investor has done historically, and then really looking at what the investor is looking to achieve going forward. So something I highlighted Heron Foundation as one of the really good examples of an investment belief statement. But there's others. Hampshire College has a really great vision of the kind of change that they're looking to achieve. And so beginning to both understand, just doing a kind of systems level audit, understanding what in the various key investment activities that the investor engages in, what are they doing? And if they're not doing anything that even is systems or systems related, that's an opportunity to begin to come up with an investment belief statement, or to even look at the manager selection process and monitoring process to start writing in some of these considerations. Take, for example, the example of Jesse Smith Noyce Foundation. They opened up this call for a new advisor, and as part of that RFP, they wrote in a few questions related to how does Jesse Smith Noyce Foundation mission relate to some of the SDGs? How can they begin to demonstrate progress towards them? Really, in some ways, light touch, simple things. There's a simple elegance to it, but then there are opportunities for doing stuff that is much more in depth. But I think at a baseline, it is just kind of understanding what the investor is doing that kind of review of these activities, and then you can start to really quickly see the opportunities for kind of low-hanging progress to move in this direction. And then there's also, just as a general starting point, we do events that are focused on systems level investment. PRI does events. We participated in an event with Sustainalytics. There's a number of folks that are now beginning to move in this direction. And so looking for those opportunities to engage kind of the network of other investors that have already been doing this. I mean, part of the thing that with our database is there's a connection function. So if an investor, asset owner or asset manager is interested in an issue like water, and they would like to go further, but they'd like to learn from what their peers are doing and potentially seek out co-investment or collaborative opportunities, we play a matchmaking function. So folks will write to us, hey, this is an area I'd like to go deeper in. Who else is a user of the database that we could connect with? And we play that kind of matchmaking function. And we also help kind of turn folks onto, so let's stick with the water example. Ceres has a water hub, and the water hub is looking at systems level consideration. We've helped contribute some stuff to a new toolkit that they're developing. And so we look for opportunities like that where we can connect people to existing groups and existing consortiums for folks to get involved in. So there's the light touch stuff, really understanding what you're doing that kind of audit, and then looking for opportunities to connect with other peers to learn as you go.
Great, thank you. So I think we have time for one more quick question, and I'm going to make it a simple one. When will the Effective Investing for the Long-Term report be available? And if any members of IEN or those that were on the webinar today have an interest in offering feedback, how can they do so?
Great question. So the goal that we have for releasing the final version of the Effective Investing report is to do so most likely end of September or sometime beginning of October of this year. So we have a kind of opportunity for folks to reflect. If they'd like to get the exposure draft, we're happy to distribute it to interested members, and trying to get us their feedback within the next 4 weeks or so would be ideal. Part of the enhancement that we're making to it, in addition to distilling and adjusting for feedback from investors that review it, we're also adding a bit more practical guidance, particularly as it relates to the issue of water. And so that will be part of the final version of the report. And then for folks, I guess just generally, both in terms of providing feedback, but also just learning more about the work that we're doing and getting engaged, they can go to our website, they can email me. I mean, our contact information is on there. And like I said, we have events and other opportunities for people to continue to engage further. And we do these demos on the database on one-on-one sessions as well. So a couple of opportunities, but I guess the most important thing is if you want to provide feedback to the report, we'd love to have it, but we'd like to get it in the next 4 weeks or so. And I will make sure that Nicole has the report, the exposure draft, as well as the right contact information to engage with us.
Great. Well, thank you both so much for this great discussion. If we could go to the next slide. I want to thank both Bill and Jessica again for participating in a really interesting conversation, and also thank all of our participants for joining us this afternoon. If you have any questions about this webinar or other activities happening in the Intentional Endowments Network or TIIP, as Bill said, please do be in touch. All of our contact information is showing on the screen now. And again, this webinar will be up on our website shortly, and slides will be available as well. So thank you again, and have a great afternoon.